Portfolio Composer, Episode 151.
You're listening to the Portfolio Composer podcast with your host and coach Garrett Hope, where he teaches you what it takes to master the business end of writing music through mindset, marketing, and business skills. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com for exclusive offers, business insights, and information not shared on the podcast. And now, for this episode of the Portfolio Composer.
You really kind of have to know your market and, really tailor some or all of your products towards that market. Of course, without giving up anything artistically of your own vision for your music, but you definitely need to be writing things that are going to sell.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Portfolio Composer. I am your host, your coach, your teacher, Garrett Hope, and I am so glad that you're joining us here today. I have a really exciting episode planned. A few years ago, one of my good friends and fellow composers, Timothy Tharaldson, was telling me about this guy who was singing in Chanticleer, and he was offering the service to record demos for composers at this really affordable rate. And I was like, wow, that's cool. And I listened to it, and it sounded fantastic. And then last year, I had a piece, I wanted to put it up for sale, and I needed a demo. And who did I call? I called Matthew Curtis at Choral Tracks. And so I've invited Matthew on the podcast so we can talk about this, so all of you can know that this is a good resource to use when you need demos. So welcome to the podcast, Matthew.
Hey, Garrett, thank you. Thanks to everyone for listening. It's really a great pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited about this. Matthew is a tenor and has performed around the world with internationally recognized choral ensembles such as Chanticleer, San Francisco Symphony Chorus, Philharmonia Baroque, American Bach Soloists, and the Rose Ensemble. He is now the voice and vision behind ChoralTracks.com, the highest quality rehearsal tracks on the market. And since its founding in 2012, the ChoralTracks.com catalog has grown to nearly 10,000 pieces of music. Matthew works with hundreds of choirs and ACDA NafME choir festivals. 10,000 tracks, holy smokes, Matthew.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. I just started it kind of full-time about 4 or 5 years ago. And I've been working to record more and more titles every single year. And last year, I got just above 3,000 pieces last year. So the catalog is really growing very fast. And I'm continuing to record more and more as my process gets more efficient.
Well, before we dig into all the services that Choral Tracks offers, kind of tell us the origin story of your business.
Yeah, so, I've been singing choral music my whole life, ever since I was very young. And I, was participating. I grew up in Wisconsin, participated in high school all-state festival, choral festival. And I still remember, getting the CD in the mail after I applied and was accepted, and got a CD of rehearsal tracks to help me learn the music. And of course, it was, just god-awful MIDI sounds playing in the background. It was just a horrible experience. I kind of always hated that. I've always hated that, singers are using those kinds of resources out there. And so, I went to college. I started getting into barbershop music, actually. And as I dug further into singing in quartets and in a chorus, I discovered this one guy who was out there recording all of these really fantastic rehearsal tracks for quartets and choruses, started his own business, was recording all of the parts. Of course, in barbershop music, 95% or maybe even higher of singers can't read music virtually at all. So they rely fully on these rehearsal tracks. And so, what he was doing kind of inspired me to give it a shot for choral music. And that's kind of how I got started.
So you saw a need in the market, and then you stepped up to fill the need.
Yeah, because, rehearsal tracks in choral music market have been around for quite a long time, ever since electronic music began. So, we're talking decades that singers and choirs have been using these resources. There are already, established companies out there who are working with all-state festivals, and they're selling, major works online. I'm sure a lot of people listening are familiar with some of those resources that are out there, that have been out there for a long time. And so kind of my goal has been, and still is, to try to, eradicate as much as I can of MIDI electronic files from the market, and offer choral singers a much better experience.
That's a very honorable mission of yours, Matthew.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's something that I think everyone can kind of agree with. I think most singers have experienced those kinds of tracks, and of course, it's a no-brainer that having real singing and in-tune singing and good diction, especially in foreign languages, is just such a better experience.
Right, absolutely. And it's not just a god-awful choir ah or ooh patch or synthetic instrument.
Yeah, I've heard it all. There's, oboe or, piano, or just every kind of instrument you can think of is out there.
So on the show notes page for this episode, I'm going to put the link to the piece you recorded for me as a demo so I could sell this score, so people can get a chance to hear what you're doing. And I'll also link to choraltracks.com. But talk to us about what you do for composers. Like I'll just leave it there. What do you do for composers?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I said that I got started with the vision of creating a product for choirs and for all state festival choirs, honors choirs, and such. And what I quickly realized is that there's this other market out there that's completely untapped, is recording for composers who are mostly self-publishing. A lot of my first customers were younger men and women who are kind of just getting started. They're not published yet, and of course, when you first get started, the process of hiring a choir and getting it professionally recorded is, of course, super expensive. Or if you're able to get a free recording of a choir performing your work, it's very difficult to get a good quality recording with a good choir singing it. And so I very quickly realized that there is a huge demand for this. There's tons of composers that need this service, especially as the self-publishing marketplace is getting much bigger, which is fantastic, by the way. And now it's to the point where I would say maybe 20 or 30% of all the music that I record is specifically for composers who are using the tracks for demo purposes.
And you sing all the parts.
I do, yeah. So I'm certainly a tenor when I sing in Chanticleer, or if I'm singing solo repertoire, opera, things like that. I'm definitely a tenor. My low notes are not that great, so I'm certainly not a bass. I have a really good facility to sing countertenor in my falsetto and in kind of a mixed head voice, but I've never actually performed anything as a countertenor. I'm probably not quite good enough to do something like that. So yeah, definitely a tenor, but I can sing all of the different parts.
Well, how do you produce those bass parts then?
Yeah, so I use a really fantastic program where, a lot of people kind of assume that maybe I'll sing the bass part up an octave and then bump it down through the mixing process with this program that I use, which is not true, because if I'm displacing a note by an octave or an entire phrase by a full octave, it'll sound distorted and sound really bad. So what I'll do is I'll sing notes down to perhaps an A flat or so, maybe B flat, depending on the day, how my voice feels. And anything below that's marked in the score, I'll just purposely sing the wrong note. So if it's notated as an F, I'll just purposely sing a B flat, for example. And then in the mixing process, that gets fixed. And the same is true on the top with the very high soprano notes. I don't sing anything really above kind of an E or an F at the top of the staff there. Everything above that, I fix in the mixing process.
Right, and it sounds really good, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing what the technology and the software can do, and it's something that I've had several years now to kind of perfect how it sounds, so I'll often kind of go back to some stuff that I recorded maybe 5-6 years ago when I first got started, and I'm listening to it just completely cringing because what I'm doing now is just so much better.
Well, it's always a process. I go back and I listen to episode 1 of this podcast, or the first 50, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And so I've clarified my vision. I've clarified the process. I think there's some really good things in every single episode, but you listen to your earlier work and you're glad that you grow, right? And mature.
Yeah, that's just true of everyone, I suppose.
Yeah. So I'm curious about your business model. So you said 20 to 30% of what you're doing is helping composers, but then you're also creating these rehearsal tracks. So who's paying for that? Is it the composers?
Right. Who's paying for the rehearsal tracks specifically?
Right. So how does your business work then?
Yeah. So 20 or 30% of my business, like I mentioned, is from composers. So that's a composer paying just kind of an upfront flat fee for the labor that goes into creating that demo recording. And then I would say another 30 or 40% of my business comes from all-state festivals, associated with ACDA, for example. I record all of the honors choirs tracks for national ACDA, and coming up now early next year for all of the division ACDA conventions, and then several state all-state festivals associated with ACDA, and then the rest of my business just comes from choirs who have been using me for a few years now in some cases brand new, where it can range from maybe they'll just need 1 or 2 songs per semester, maybe some more difficult things that they're programming, to many choirs that I work with now. They love the track so much that they're hiring me to record everything that they program throughout the course of the entire year.
And you have an app and a subscription service, is that right?
Yep, I have a subscription service that I just released earlier this year, and it speaks to that kind of all-inclusive package for choirs, where I charge, no matter how big the choir is, $995 per year guarantees that a choir will get rehearsal tracks for everything that they program, whether it's already in my catalog or not.
Wow! And you're having choirs subscribe to this?
Yeah. It's still early. I probably have right now maybe 30 or 35 or so. But there's many of them, many people I've spoken to who are interested in it for next season who haven't yet signed on. And so I'm kind of expecting perhaps this summer or early fall to get kind of a huge wave of business from that. It's a business model that I've really tested, a price point that I've really tested with people. And I think it's really going to be kind of the new future for me is that premium choir subscription model. Right.
I think we are moving towards that, even with scores. So maybe we'll get to the point where performers will all be holding tablets and they can isolate their part and hear your rehearsal track for their part or the whole mix all within the app while viewing the score.
Yeah. That's a little bit more challenging because it requires partnerships with other great companies that are already out there. That's one avenue that I haven't really yet explored is partnering with a sheet music retailer or a music publisher or even a company like Smart Music, if you're familiar with that. A lot of schools use Smart Music. And so I think that there's a lot of potential for me there. But up until now, I've just kind of been focusing more on building my own brand, recording just as much as I can. And so hopefully in the near future, maybe some of those avenues will open up for me.
So as you were building your business, did you know a lot about business before you went into it? Or did you kind of learn it as you go?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's a really important one for composers in general. But for me, I've always kind of had a sense of business. I never went to school for it. I've never had any other experiences. But I grew up in a family of lawyers and businessmen and doctors and such. And so, music always really came easy for me, from a very young age, and it's something I knew pretty early on that this is something that was kind of, meant to be for me. But I've always wanted more than just that. So that's kind of what has driven me to this point, and to take a very kind of unconventional route than most people would take.
Yeah? What do you mean by that?
Well, kind of a conventional route for most musicians is to, go through the academic route, right? Even in opera now, if you're a performing singer, you pretty much have to have a master's degree to get anywhere. If you're going to be teaching at the collegiate level, you absolutely have to get your doctorate. So you're talking years and years and years of education, and that's not something that was right for me. It's not something that I enjoy doing a whole lot, and so I've always kind of wanted to take my own route, kind of be my own boss, and get my feet into the market as an artist and as a businessman in my own way.
What has surprised you the most as you've learned the business?
What always surprises me every single day, and I think this is a really great message and realization for any composers, especially because I think anyone who's a composer is at heart kind of has to be kind of a business person as well. And what I discover every single day for myself is that hard work truly does pay off. Just the daily grind, having to do horrible things that you've never thought you've had to do before, putting in just insane hours. At heart, I'm absolutely still an artist, but I find myself having to do all of these, tasks every single day that I don't necessarily enjoy having to do. And so, just fighting through that, putting in the hours, putting in the hard work, it truly, absolutely does pay off in the long run.
So do you find that you end up working late at night, early in the morning, or whenever there's cracks in the day?
Yeah. So my office is just at home here. It's a really, humble, easy setup. It's just a microphone that plugs into a preamp that plugs into my computer. So that's pretty much basically it. So anyone who works from home knows that there's kind of a difficult separation between work life and home life. Mm-hmm. And so, it's kind of an around the clock kind of a thing. You wake up and you sit down and go right to work, and the emails kind of never stop. And
no, they don't.
So, to schedule any time where you're not working, it's almost like you have to make an effort to not work. It's interesting how it works out, but it certainly isn't for everyone. But if you're someone who can power through those long hours and all that extra hard work, it truly, absolutely does pay off in the end.
So usually, in order to grow, we have to have growing experiences, and those growing experiences are often precipitated by some sort of failure or mistake.
Oh, yeah.
I'm interested, Matthew, in a story about one of these growing experiences as it pertains to the business of music or entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I think any good startup business that is successful is successful because they're just laser focused, right? So they know exactly what the business model is. They know what the market is. They have all of that information behind them. But to actually get to that point of incredible focus is a struggle for everyone, right? So it certainly was for me as well. So there have been some people who I've hired who haven't worked out very well, lost some money there. I attempted kind of early on to develop a mobile app that didn't turn out so well. I've hired a couple of developers to do some work on my website that didn't work out so well. So you're talking about, thousands of dollars wasted and lots of sleepless nights and stress and things like that. Just kind of the overall business model. When I first got started, I was interested in doing a lot with video, putting together audio files with the actual visual sheet music on the page, which is for customers an absolutely fantastic experience, but just learning how the licensing goes in the market and how much more complicated that becomes, I kind of realized, perhaps a little bit too late, that wasn't a good way to get going. So, just projects like that were just many, many hours of labor just completely wasted and money wasted here and there.
Oh, right. Yeah, we all have to go through those.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, it was probably maybe 2 or 3 years ago where I really got just 100% completely laser focused on, this is my business model. This is my production process. And it's like a well-oiled machine kind of a thing. But yeah, it took me at least a few years to kind of figure that out.
So when you say getting laser focused, as part of that, as Simon Sinek says in his TED Talk in his book, Starting with Why, do you have a purpose or a point, a mission you want to achieve?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I was a music education major in college, and music education has always been very important to me. But I've never been someone who would be that great of a teacher. I could be a good teacher on a day-to-day basis, but to do it as a career certainly isn't my passion. And so I think first and foremost is to make a major contribution to choral music education with these rehearsal tracks. A lot of people who are into more kind of traditional ways of teaching music perhaps don't like the idea of using learning tracks because it takes away from Kadai method and teaching sight singing, or that at least that's what they say. And that's certainly not my goal at all. My goal is just to give, especially the individual singer, a new kind of tool, or a much better tool for them to help learn their music on their own. So a choir director can feel good about assigning some homework outside of an actual rehearsal, again, with the assumption that 90% or however many folks out there who are singing choral music really have very, very little, if any at all, sight reading skills. They perhaps don't have access to a piano, or they can't play piano. And so having rehearsal tracks for them at home or in their car, or during a lunch break at work or whatever, is kind of a really valuable tool for those just individual singer levels of learning. That's really interesting.
And I'm curious about your thoughts concerning just the market in general. You're obviously 100% bought into this subscription and web-based service idea. Why do you think the music world is ready for this change as opposed to the old model? And where do you see it going? And then third question, if we can jump that in here, is how do composers fit into the new business economy as you see it?
I think for what I'm doing and for what composers are doing, writing great intellectual property with their music and with my recordings, we're kind of in a day where content is king, right? So if you're someone who's into Netflix, for example, the people who are actually making that content that goes onto Netflix are making just a ton of money, right? So much so where Netflix decided a few years ago to start making their own content because they don't want to have to pay, NBC Universal tons of money to license their content. And so I guess kind of what I'm seeing for my business and for composers is that there are just so many more opportunities out there to kind of make it on your own if you're someone who's a little bit more savvy and can handle the hard work. And so I think that's why a lot of composers now are being very successful, selling on marketplaces where they don't have to give up any of their intellectual property, not going the route of traditional publishing. And I think the more and more people who do that, it kind of chips away more and more at the old model of publishing. And I think over time, it's really going to make a big difference. It already is.
Yeah. So you said there's more opportunities, and you think these opportunities exist if composers can think entrepreneurially, like kind of not these non-traditional paths that you outlined earlier?
Yeah, exactly. So, if you're a composer, you really kind of have to know your market and, really tailor some or all of your products towards that market, of course, without giving up anything artistically of your own vision for your music. But you definitely need to be writing things that are going to sell well. So writing something that has tons of divisi and is 6-7 minutes long, or things like that perhaps just won't sell as well, unfortunately. So you really have to kind of talk to choirs, talk to choir directors in community choirs, in school choirs, church choirs, ask them what they look for when they're programming music, what they look for when they are programming a concert and are trying to discover new things. So knowing your market, I think, is really important in that sense. And then also really important is being able to market yourself and build a brand around yourself. So, of course, one opportunity with that is through social media. So learning how Facebook works from a business sense and Instagram. Those are all things that I'm just starting to figure out a little bit more for myself. I haven't been doing quite as well with that up to this point. Those things, it's something, there's a learning curve with all of that stuff. There's tons of free online courses that I took to get better acquainted with how all of that works. And then just trial and error, getting a plan together. I'm hiring someone who's helping me with social media, for example. Just getting a plan together and then just executing it as best you can as a trial and error learning kind of experience.
Yeah. Well, I'm grinning because you just outlined some of my big philosophy when I'm teaching marketing, because I have an online marketing for composers course.
Oh, you do?
And
cool.
The first thing I have my students do is to identify their audience and then identify how they can serve that audience and then build a brand around yourself. And this, these are the principles of marketing, right? And composers can do it too without being like a used car salesman, without being pushy, and doing it with artistic integrity. This is not selling out. This is serving people with your music.
Yeah, and I mean, this is why resources like your podcast here and your blog are just so fantastic, because we're kind of all in this together, and we can really kind of learn from each other's experiences and knowledge and such. And like I said before, I truly am an artist at heart. I'm not at all a composer, but I can't imagine giving away 90% of my intellectual property or whatever publishers take for the rest of my life, plus whatever, 70 years after my death or whatever the copyright laws are. I mean, I just could never imagine doing anything like that. I think it's an absolute travesty. And I think it's absolutely fantastic that the work that you're doing, trying to empower composers to not go that route and to go it on their own, because like I said, there are just so many opportunities out there if you execute it well to do much better on your own.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That's welcome encouragement.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious though. I sent you kind of an outline of how the interview might flow. And one of the things I had said is I was going to ask you for 3 business tips that you could give the composers. What are your 3 business tips?
So I would say definitely number 1, like we already talked about, to know your market. Would you like me to kind of expand on them a little bit too?
Well, you kind of already expanded on that one.
Yep, already expanded on that one. Know your market. Number 2, work incredibly hard, harder than anyone else out there. Be willing to work more than 40 hours per week. Be willing to live humbly so you can save as much as you can, and so you can put it back into your business. And then number 3, treat your work like you're running a business. So you need to build your own brand. You need to put your face out there on social media, not only just, through kind of pictures and headshots and such, but everything is video now, live video. So like, for example, I'm just started late last year, doing a lot of video stuff. So I purchased some equipment for my studio to make my videos really nice quality. So really nice lighting, a nice kind of background, backdrop and everything. So everything that you do, treat it like a business and yourself as an artist, as a brand.
Can't go wrong if you do that.
Yeah.
Strange question.
Okay.
One you're not prepared for. But what is something that you've always wanted to talk about, but no one ever asks you?
I've always wanted to talk about, but no one ever asked me. That's a great question. I think that what I'm doing here with choral tracks and what I'm trying to achieve is kind of so unique where I think the potential and the end game can go. But it's something that kind of only I have formulated in my mind. And so when I'm having conversations about choral tracks, I'm always curious for people, like how big can they think about potentially where this could go. And so no one's ever really kind of gone there before of what's the end game. Okay.
Well, let's talk about the end game. What's your big vision when you're done? When you have built choral tracks to what you want it to be, what will it look like?
Yeah, so I'm very much an artist at heart. So, I'm doing this to make a contribution to music education, to help singers learn music, to help choirs get much more artistry out of their music versus just sitting in rehearsal after rehearsal, just, banging notes out. But for me, kind of my end game is to, make some good money at this, of course, and really kind of build my own name as an artist. I feel like, there are choirs out there that are very famous that everyone knows. There are great conductors out there who are very famous and everyone knows. Great composers, of course, who everyone knows. But there's never really been a choral singer out there that people can really kind of look up to. I feel like there's always been kind of a void for that kind of thing. There are so many young people who are singing choral music, and they don't have an individual singer to really kind of look up to. If you ask people who is the most famous choral singer that they'll say maybe number one, the guy in the King Singers who sings super high, or they'll say the guy in Chanticleer with the big mustache who sings super low, but beyond that, there's never really been anyone to kind of take on that role. And so for me as an artist, I would love to kind of have that kind of a role for my own name, my own brand as an artist.
I love that vision. I love it a lot. So it seems like you've done a lot of work, because building a business takes self-work. You have to examine yourself, make sure that you get all of those roadblocks about money and selling out of the way. Then you've clarified your vision, you've built a marketing plan, and you've probably got 90-day, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and 10-year goals all mapped out. It's wonderful.
Yeah. And I've really focused in the first several years of the company to grow the brand of the company, to save as much money as I can, to make it really financially viable, which I feel like just a couple of years ago I kind of finally achieved that. And so now my goal is to, of course, keep that rolling, keep that growing, but I'm also now putting a lot more effort into growing my own name, Matthew Curtis, as an artist, growing that brand right alongside choral tracks to better link the two, so that when people are using my tracks, it's not just an empty voice, not just an educational experience, but again, it's actually a face, it's actually a person that they can kind of look up to and aspire to in that way.
Yeah, it's Matthew Curtis. And
exactly.
As far as I can tell, you are doing that. Like getting to meet you in person after several online interactions at ACDA, you have built that brand. And as you walked around and I observed you meeting people at booths, you were Choral Tracks and you were Matthew Curtis. And I think that your hard work is paying off.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, and I agree. It's just kind of one day at a time kind of a thing. But still, a lot of my customers, I'll deliver the tracks to the choir director through a Dropbox.com link, or some kind of a way like that, and the tracks get distributed to the singers without any other kind of mention of who this is or what this is. A lot of people think it's a quartet who's singing all the parts, and so it's my kind of constant challenge to keep growing that awareness and growing my own brand.
Well, that'll come, and if you develop a new app, and I thought you were, then people will be using that app, and your name and brand and face can be all over it.
Yep. That's my next step for next year is to connect in a mobile app for everything. But everything works really well on through the mobile website. If you just go on your phone to choraltracks.com through the Safari browser. But having an app is one thing I do not currently have.
One of the things you just said a minute ago was that it took a few years of working really hard and saving and building a business before you finally got to the point that things were really happening monetarily. What kind of encouragement or advice could you give to the young composer just out of college who's wanting to build a business but might have student loan debt, or the more mature composer who's transitioning from one job into writing full-time or wants to write more? There's always that hump of like, how long do you keep working at it to get that breakthrough?
Yeah, so I would definitely say that saving as much money as you can, not spending money frivolously in your life is huge. Most companies, most startups, they start out in an incredible amount of debt. And then it takes them, at least 5-6 years to actually get out of that debt before they can actually make enough profit to pay themselves. And so as composers and as musicians, we certainly don't want to find ourselves in that position. So just saving up as much money as you can is, I think, the most important thing.
I think that's great advice.
Yeah. Oh, and then one more thing that's very true for me, and I'm not a composer, so maybe this isn't as true for composers. Maybe you can correct me, but for me to make this business work, it's all about volume of content. That's one thing that I learned very early on, because of course I'm an artist. I'm recording my own stuff. I'm a perfectionist. I want it to be as pristine and perfect as it can be. But I realized very quickly that I'm not going to make any money that way, obsessing about those things. And so what I go for now is more volume. That's why I can create a few thousand pieces of music a year now. Well, of course, still trying to keep the quality as good as I can. But I feel like that could be true for composers as well, is if you're writing a much higher volume of content, of titles, that you have a much higher chance of success.
So write, and then write some more.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, keep the just keep the energy going. Just do it as much as you can. Some people, that comes easier to them than others. But I think that's a very important reality of the business. There's just, there's so much stuff out there. There's so many composers writing different things that the more that you can write, the better chance that you're going to have that kind of breakthrough.
That's wonderful. So composers who are interested in hiring you to do demos of their music, because folks, trust me, choir directors don't want to hear to MIDI renderings. How do they reach out to you and get a quote? Because it is by quote, not a flat rate per composer.
It is, yeah. So, if you go to my website, www.choraltracks.com, or if you just Google my name, Matthew Curtis, or Google Choral Tracks, I'm really easy to get a hold of. You can message me on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram as well. So generally I charge anywhere from about $125 to $175 on average to record a piece of music for a composer. And usually I can get a first draft together in about 2 to 4 weeks usually. And then from that first draft, if there are any note mistakes or rhythm mistakes or things we want to edit, such as dynamics and balance and things like that, then we can absolutely take care of that at no additional charge. And then once a final draft is put together, then the composer is very welcome and encouraged to use that however he or she would like for self-promotion. So social media, a lot of people put it up on YouTube with sheet music on the video. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, they're trying to get published so they can take the demo recording and submit it to publishers or to composition contests that they're entered into. And so usually it's anywhere from $125 to $175, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the difficulty of the piece. And that's it. You can use it for the rest of your life, however you would like.
Composers, I kid you not, this is money well spent. If you write choral music and you want to promote it and you don't have a choir that can record it for you and you want it in tune with good diction, just hire Matthew. It's worth the cost. Why don't we take a quick break right here and we'll come back for the lightning round.
Sounds great.
Hey, composers, if you have not yet gotten the chance to go to patreon.com/portfolio composer to check out the community we're building over there, I encourage you to do that. Patreon is a place where you can go and support the people who are creating things that you enjoy, whether that's composers, poets, visual artists, or podcasters. And all I'm doing is asking you to consider giving $1 a month towards the creation of this podcast. That allows me to create ever more content, and I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff. We've got regular webinars and group coaching calls. The last one was tremendous. I've got great stuff planned for what's coming up in the future. And many of you have already taken advantage of this opportunity, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. In particular, I would like to thank Tony, Michael, Anna, EJ, Dennis, Jocelyn, and Jason for coming on board and joining the Portfolio Composer community. If you get any value out of this podcast at all, I hope that you would consider just doing $1 a month. It would mean a lot to me, and it will help me continue to create new things for you. So if you would like to take advantage of this and join the community and have access to regular webinars, some personal coaching, and even my Marketing for Composers course, go to patreon.com/portfolio composer. Or you can click on the show notes on either the website, portfoliocomposer.com, or on your podcast playing app on your mobile device. Most of these apps, if you click on the logo image, it'll take you to the show notes, and there is a link right there where you can go to that page and take a look. Thanks.
Welcome to the lightning round.
All right, Matthew, if you could turn back the clock, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
To my 20-year-old self, I would definitely say to try everything as far as learn as many different styles of music as possible, just a diverse array of styles and genres. Learn how to play as many instruments as possible. Just try everything and anything.
Anything and everything. That's
yes.
Great. What is a personal habit of yours that you feel leads to your success?
For me, it is absolutely how hard I work and how many hours I put in. It's something that I can just kind of constantly 24/7, 365 days a year, just work just harder than anyone. That's definitely for me the best.
What is an instrument? I know you're a vocalist, and that's great. I mean, that is the natural instrument. But what instrument have you always wanted to learn to play, and why?
I would absolutely say the organ. I love the organ. So I grew up in a non-musical family, so I wasn't encouraged to learn how to play piano as I was kind of singing in boy choir and all of that. And so absolutely the organ, but first learn how to play piano.
Nice. I don't think you can go wrong with that.
No, everyone should do that. I'm way behind on that.
So this next question comes from the pure love of music, because I'm often most inspired to write after hearing a great performance or hearing a wonderful recording. And these are those, oh my gosh moments where time seems to stop.
Mm-hmm.
But what is one composition that had a profound impact on you, and why?
I think I would have to say, and perhaps this is a true answer of for a lot of people, the Biebl Ave Maria. I remember I started singing in boy choir when I was 7 years old, so very young, and that was kind of my first experience hearing Chanticleer do the Biebl Ave Maria, a recording of it, not live, just a recording. And kind of ever since then, I was probably 7 or 8. Ever since then, I always had aspired to perhaps maybe someday sing in a group like that, and maybe even sing that song in that group. And so hearing that song was kind of my introduction to, fantastic choral music, a fantastic performance of it, and an amazing group like Chanticleer.
Is there a book you could recommend for the Portfolio Composer audience that could benefit either their personal, creative, or business lives? This could even be a work of fiction.
Very good. Yeah. One interesting thing about me, which actually is not very true of a lot of kind of entrepreneur business people, is that I've never been a very big fan of reading books. Just never. I've never gotten into reading. It's always been kind of a quirk of mine. And so I don't have a specific book off the top of my head. But that being said, as I've kind of been learning how to, run a business, how to actually get into business, I'm just a sponge for anything, business articles out there. If I need to learn how to do something in a free online course, or magazines, or great podcasts like your podcast here, I just eat all of that stuff up. But as far as specific books, I've never really kind of gotten into that.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
Where? Well, I guess you've already said it, but where can people find you on the internet, and how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so the best place is to go to my website, www.choraltracks.com. But I'm all over the place: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you just Google my name, Matthew Curtis, I'm everywhere. You can find my headshot on iTunes all over the place with my tracks, or Spotify, Amazon MP3. So I'm kind of all over the place. But the website, www.choraltracks.com, is definitely the easiest place to go.
Excellent. Matthew, do you have any final words of advice or wisdom you could share with the podcast listeners?
Yeah. I mean, I think just always trying to think outside the box, right? So if you're someone who's going into self-publishing, trying to make it on your own, how can you set yourself up differently than others who are out there? How can you kind of think outside the box to really make yourself known? I don't have any kind of specific advice on how people can discover that for themselves, but it's always something I feel that's very important for an entrepreneur or a business person, is to set yourself apart from everyone else.
The trick is, how do you do that?
Yeah, that's the hard part, and it's a difference between, writing to make money, or writing to, define yourself as an artist and a brand, because a lot of times those things don't always go together. So you kind of have to perhaps you could call it sell out sometimes to go where the money is first before you can really kind of define yourself.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for your time today. I know we had to juggle babysitters and family schedules to get here, but we did it. And I'm so glad we did. I really am appreciative of the service that you offer composers. I have taken advantage of it, and I recommend you very highly.
I've had such a great time. Thank you so much. The work that you're doing here is so fantastic. I hope that there are just tons and tons of composers listening to this and benefiting from it.
Hey, composers, don't go quite yet. I will put an example in the show notes page on the website of Matthew Curtis's work. That is the track that I hired him to create the demo for. But as a treat, I decided to also end the podcast with the same track. This is a work for SATB chorus with piano accompaniment and a soprano soloist. This was written for a church choir, so that is amateur singers, and it's highly melodic and very folk-like. And this is a text by John Calvin. The piece is called I Greet Thee.
Substance and our strength.